Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2019. The topic is training, and the title is When to Switch from Off-Season to Prep, Aesthetics, and Strength. So we're talking about aesthetic competitions, which would be bikini, wellness, figure, physique, men's classic physique, men's bodybuilding, all those categories. So we're going to talk about aesthetic competitions and then also strength competitions, specifically powerlifting. This topic came up with one of my business clients. They're they're a personal trainer. They do online training, but also in-person training. But they're a personal trainer, and we're working together to put together some conceptual programming for his clients. And what that means is basically some templates for programming structures, so that way he can be certain he's getting the best outcome for his clients. And there are structures that he'll be able to apply to all of his clients, make personalization tweaks, such as exercise selection based on their skill set, their individual needs, the equipment they have available, but he knows he has a known structure that is going to get great results. So I love that type of programming. It's what I do with my clients in the sense of everything is created individually for them, but there's concepts in place to make sure that they get the best outcome and nothing that is needed is missed. So that's the idea. In our conversation recently, he asked the following question. I paraphrased a little bit just to make it a little bit cleaner for the podcast, is when do you switch a client over from off-season prep, and what does that look like for nutrition and training? And if you don't mind, could you explain it for aesthetic competitions and strength athletes, specifically powerlifting, since I'm new to training those clients? So that's what we're going to look into. For aesthetics, well, I guess if we're looking for like off-season to prep, that'd be a pretty decent place to start defining things. So off-season for aesthetics is you're building muscle, you're shaping muscle. You're definitely not trying to gain body fat, but your goal isn't to get leaner in the off-season. Now this is typical, like a typical definition of off-season, is you're going to build muscle and work on shape. For strength athletes, you're getting stronger. So those are the main focuses in off-season, whereas prep for aesthetic competitions, you're now going to focus on getting leaner, posing, but in general, this focus switches from purely building muscle with minimum fat gain to now you're trying to lose all your body fat without losing muscle. Then for strength athletes, you go from trying to build strength to refining your strength, meaning switching over back to competition lifts, getting back to singles, and kind of putting all the strength that you've been building back to practical applicational use that you'll be using in a powerlifting meet. So let's start with aesthetic athletes. So again, this is bikini, wellness, figure, physique, men's classic physique, men's bodybuilding, all of those type of things. When do we switch? It really kind of depends on body fat. If somebody is under 20% body fat, I'll usually switch around 16 to 20 weeks out from the competition. Now, it's very variable depending on like what habits they have in place. Typically 16 to 20 weeks out from the competition, they're consistent with training, they're consistent with nutrition, they're hitting all their numbers, 6 out of 7 days a week. Everything's crisp, they already know what they're doing. So we'll go ahead and make that switch over at 16 to 20 weeks away from the competition, assuming they don't have any skills of tracking nutrition, applying nutrition that have yet to be developed. They know what they're doing, they are consistent, so now we just start modifying the food and they're going to be able to hit those numbers and hit those amounts. And they're under 20% body fat, meaning we're probably going to be able to get lean enough without major issue in 16 to 20 weeks. Now, if somebody's much leaner than that, do they have to start 20 weeks away? No. If somebody's holding around 12% body fat, we certainly don't have to start 20 weeks away. But I have to give some kind of general answer for the podcast. So I would typically cut people off around the 20% body fat as a distinguishing marker of whether 16 to 20 weeks away or further away. So what we're looking for is if somebody's 20% or leaner. You want to start with enough time that you can get lean ahead of the show. Maybe be kind of where you need to be about 1 to 2 weeks ahead of the show. This creates less mental stress because you're not like stressing out the entire time of whether or not you're going to make it. It allows the skin to be a little bit tighter, so you can actually be a little bit earlier, maybe 2 weeks a little, be lean enough 2 weeks ahead of time. You haven't depleted water or anything yet, but you're lean enough body fat wise. So that way the skin continues to tighten and look crisper for the stage. And you have an overall better just aesthetic look. You don't show up basically like a dead body with saggy skin and just like emaciated and just destroyed. We want you looking as if you're that lean naturally all the time. There's a difference in the way people will look when they crash into a show versus they're ahead on time. It looks almost like it's like second nature for you to be that lean versus it looks like you're almost going to die. So that does show when you're on stage and in how the physique looks. So we want to be there a little bit early. So the old school thought, and it's still present, is people will think if they start too early, that's a negative. Because once you start prep, you're not going to build any more muscle. That is not true at all. They've shown in studies that you can build muscle while in a calorie deficit, assuming there's enough protein, assuming the stimulus is correct, assuming the deficit is moderate. But you can actually still build muscle tissue while losing body fat, while dieting in a calorie deficit. So just because you start prep doesn't mean you now have to give up building more muscle and everything is just converts over to like trying to preserve muscle. That's not until you get further into a caloric deficit state. So just because you start prep does not mean you're not going to build any more muscle. Absolutely not. So don't worry about that, although that is a common thing that people worry about. So I would start early, make sure you're there on time. I would rather show up with a couple pounds of muscle lost than a couple pounds of fat yet to lose. When you go to shows, you will be judged on leanness first, muscle mass second. The leanest person wins unless they have an astronomical less amount of muscle tissue. But even if you and another person are similar in muscle mass, the leanest person wins, absolutely without a doubt. It is harder to get leaner than it is to build muscle. And the judges know that. The judges of those shows are human beings. They're going to be biased. They know what is harder to do, and they're going to reward it. And that is to get absolutely peeled, like to get totally lean. So I would always err on the side of being leaner first and then trying to hold on to muscle tissue. But again, that really does not happen until the calorie deficit has to get pretty extreme. Now, if you're over 20% body fat, we're usually going to do this in stages. So we're going to have like practice preps, meaning you're going to maybe you start at like 30% body fat. So like, for example, sometimes clients will come to me and they're like, hey, I want to compete in a competition, aesthetic competition. I'm like, that's awesome. However, they have random diet experience. They have randomish training experience. They are significantly overweight, like maybe 30% body fat. And it's like, okay, we can definitely do that. 100% we can do it. But they need to build new habits first. Like, they don't even know how to track their food consistently on a regular basis. There's a lot of life that gets in the way for them, and they just can't be consistent with it. So we have to learn how to do that. We have to learn how to, make things work even whenever nothing's working. So we have to learn how to be consistent with tracking calories, tracking protein, get the foods down, get our timing right throughout the day, just get that mindset in place. So that way, whenever we're dieting for the competition and, it's push comes to shove, there's a deadline, things have to be done in a certain rate, they're not missing days, and then that adds a bunch of stress and they end up showing up on stage suboptimal and not happy. So we have to get life habits in place first. That can take, months for people. That could take 6 months for somebody to kind of get that in place. Now, during the 6 months, they're going to lose weight, maybe they'll lose 10, 15 pounds over the 6 months. So not a lot in 6 month period, but it's because they're not consistent. They're only getting half their days right. So that phase has to be dealt with and completed first. Then you would say, okay, well, let's push maybe for 3 months, so 12 weeks. Let's do a 12-week practice prep. Because now maybe they're 28% body fat. And you're like, okay, we're still way too far away, body fat wise, from doing a show. We can't just diet all the way from there. So if they're 60 plus pounds overweight, you're not just going to diet 60 straight pounds off, show up at the competition and look and feel decent. You might not even care how you feel. You're just going to look like crap. Your skin's going to be loose. You're going to have a hard time filling up. You're going to have a hard time getting drier and leaner. You have to take crazy diuretics to get lean if you are not doing a tested show, because the body's going to be so stressed from like chronic continuation of dieting. It's just not a good process. So you want to do a practice cut, practice prep. That might be 3 months. Then you kind of hold that weight for 6 weeks. Then you push again for 3 months and you hold that weight for 6 weeks. So maybe in total, all of a sudden, now it's been maybe a year and you've lost, say, 50, 60 pounds. And now we're at a body fat percentage that is appropriate to pick a show and actually go into a cut. Like the prep where there's a deadline, there's money on the line. You've told people you're going to do this now, so families trying to, make their schedule work. So now it's like pressure. They're like, it's got to go, right? So it depends on if somebody's over 20% body fat. Depends on a lot. Are they consistent with tracking nutrition, their calories, their protein, no excuses, they get it right, 6 out of 7 days a week? If that's in place, oh man, that's the biggest thing. Now we can move a lot faster. If you're not even consistent with that stuff yet, I wouldn't even worry about doing a show at this point. You would know that you want to work towards it, but no way in hell are you going to pick a date. No way in hell are you going to put money to it, like registration and everything. You got to be able to track what you do and be consistent with what you do before you then think doing anything is going to lead to anything. You can have all the want in the world, but you got to actually do the work. If you don't know what your body fat is at, so here I am talking about being 20% body fat, more or less. If you don't know what your body fat is at, you can get scans done and like body fat testing now. When I was in school and I was teaching, we had access to BodPod. I taught students how to use BodPod and did exercise physiology labs and all this stuff. So when I was teaching that, I had access to that, and it was less common that the general population would have access. However, it is common now. You can actually pay to go get a DEXA scan in most major cities, at least in the United States. You can get most major cities, you can get a DEXA scan done. Maybe BodPod, which is air displacement, water submersion. More commonly and easier to access is probably like in-body scans. I'm not a big fan of using electrical impedance devices because they're just not highly accurate, but they can at least give you a general idea of where you're at. So in-body scans are more common now, again, in gyms in America, but they'll offer that. So I prefer DEXA scan. It's the gold standard of what I have learned and what I kind of keep up to date with data-wise. But BodPod works great. Water submersion works great. In-body scan gives you a good idea of where you're at, but I wouldn't, bet my life on that being precise down to the singular percentage. So if it says you're at 20, you're probably between probably 18 to 22, maybe 17 to 23. You're plus or minus a little bit. But you get a DEXA scan or an in-body scan or DEXA scan, BodPod, or water submersion, and it tells you you're 20%. You know you're 20%. Boom, pretty spot on. Now, there are trainers who often do like skin fold measurements. I would not use that at all. I've done over 1,000 skin fold measurements on students and clients. I don't do them anymore. I did it when I was teaching at the university because I had to teach students how to do it. They're so inconsistent depending on who's doing it that I don't think they're accurate in any way to even be useful. So I wouldn't do that as like my way of testing. The DEXA scan, BodPod, water submersion, in-body scan. So that gives you an idea of if you're under 20%, probably starting 16 to 20 weeks away is good. If you're over 20%, you got to do some practice preps. Get your body fat under 20%, then you would actually consider picking a show and really pushing for it. What does that switch look like? So that's what the trainer really wanted to know is, what does nutrition and training look like when you make the switch from off-season to prep? For aesthetic competitions, for nutrition, really you're just going from the general approach of gaining muscle with minimum fat gain to now you want to lose body fat while trying to build muscle as long as you possibly can in the calorie deficit. But eventually, if you have to cut the calories even more, you're going to now switch over to like maintaining muscle as you try to lose body fat. But there's a significant portion of the prep, I mean a good, potentially 8 weeks or so, where you're still going to be building muscle for sure. And the way in which I modify the approach is I've actually had clients where from 20 weeks out to the day on stage, we didn't reduce calories. I'll let you sink that in. We actually modified their training volume, their activity level to create the leanness that we needed. So we actually were able to build muscle damn near the whole way in. I've had other clients, though, where we actually have had to do pretty severe calorie cuts. We've had to do some cardio stuff, make it work, figure it out, and definitely didn't get to build muscle the whole way through, but there was still a significant portion at the beginning, a good 4 to 8 weeks where they were definitely still building muscle, but then we had to kind of pull the calories out even more. And at that point, you're now working on muscle preservation. But that is essentially the switch in mindset is you go from building muscle with minimum fat gain to now losing fat with minimum muscle loss in the ultimate end of the process. Protein stays consistent around 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, and you do adjust that as the body weight goes down. Carbs, fats will make up the rest of the calories. We'll do a caloric cycling. Training days, you're going to have more carbs and fats. Non-training days, you're going to have less carbs and fats. You then track the weekly caloric average, and you push that down to get body fat to continue to come off over time. So that's the kind of change that you're making is, am I seeing the leanness that I need to see at the rate I'm needing to see it? If I am not, I got to push the weekly calorie down. Now that means I'll modify the high days and the low days. If I'm seeing the progress I want, I'm going to keep everything the same for next week. And you just kind of process it each week, how you feeling, what's going on, and then you make adjustments as you go. But that's nutritionally, is you keep protein around 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. Everything else is carbs and fats. And you can have a mixture of that. If you eat mostly carbs, that could be a good thing for some people, bad thing for other people. If you eat mostly fats, again, good thing for some people, bad for other people. I've had people who have successfully gotten on stage, looked absolutely great, having anywhere from a high-fat diet to a low-fat diet to a high-carb, low-carb, mixed, whatever it might be in between. There's studies that prove that you can get super lean regardless of whatever your fat or carb percentage is. So it's really based on that person's food preferences and digestive preferences. So for example, I was talking with one of my previous clients who's competed and now they're a personal trainer, and we were laughing recently because what they had, when they used to do high carb diets, they would be crazy hungry all the time. And that was a hindrance for them to be able to get lean. But they thought that's what they should do, because when they were looking at most bodybuilding, days in the life, like a full day of eating, there was a lot of carbs. And part of it is they were looking at people who were, high 200 plus pound males, 250, 260 pounds, they have six pack abs, and they have to get so many calories in that they're going to want to be hungry during the day, so that way they can get enough food in. This client was only eating 2,200 calories in a day, so it was like by the time they had that, like they had breakfast and lunch, they were already there because they were so damn hungry all day. So we had to switch them over to fats. When we switched them mostly over to fats, they felt great, much leaner, overall less hunger, and they did a wonderful job. However, I have had clients where we did fat-based diets. They felt horrible, no energy whatsoever. We switch them to carbs. They look great, feel great. They get leaner right into the show. So it's really experimenting and seeing which your body processes well and prefers to use digestively and energetically, and if you have any side effects like cravings or poor sleep or anything like that. Then for training, typically in the off season, you're going to have slower paced workouts because you're focusing on trying to create muscle damage. So you're going to have heavy movements. You're going to have a mixture of compound movements and isolation movements, but the main focus is progressive overload, really pushing weights to try to kill the muscles and get good muscle damage. When switched over to prep, you try to do more volumizing structure, like supersets, circuits. You use intensifiers like drop sets, rest pause. You're trying to push more volume into the training so that way you can get muscle damage, but you're trying to burn more calories in the workouts. And those techniques, like adding the intensifiers, adding the volumizer concepts to the program, you're not going to be able to use maximal weight loads, and that's actually okay. You're still going to get muscle damage, but at this point, we're not really worrying about the strength, like getting stronger kind of thing. We're worrying about damaging tissue, getting the like caloric expenditure of having to replace the tissue, repair the tissue, grow the tissue if we have enough protein, which we would. So you're looking to make the body do work, and that's going to get the body leaner. So that's the switch that you start making. Once muscle recovery is maximized, meaning if you add any more weights, the person's just going to have muscle problems and joint problems. They're lifting as much weight as they can. They're recovering from as much muscle damage as they can. If you still need movement for caloric reduction that you don't want to offset with calorie reduction in nutrition, but you're trying to burn more calories, then we would add cardio. So you would add steady state cardio or some light interval cardio if you've maximized already how much weights the person can recover from and you don't want to continue to push the calories down. You can then just increase cardio as a way of kind of still manipulating the situation to get them leaner without having to lift weights more when it's not beneficial or cutting calories more when that's not beneficial. So that's the process for aesthetics. Is when do we switch? It depends on body fat. But roughly, if you're already lean, like lean-ish, 16 to 20 weeks away. If you're not leanish, then you can do some practice preps, cut your way to being lean, and then you would pick a show and go from there. Now, if we look at powerlifting, because this is what they specifically wanted to know about, when do we switch? Well, aesthetic athletes, it depends on body fat levels. We said 20% is kind of like a good cutoff. For strength athletes, specifically in powerlifting, it depends on their technique proficiency with the compound lifts. How good are they at technique? Do they already have squat, bench, and deadlift technique really clean? If they do, then I typically would switch to all competition lifts at about 12 weeks out from the meet. This is, give or take a couple weeks here or there, depending on the person. But we would now be doing, if they do a low bar back squat, we're going to be doing a low bar back squat at 12 weeks out. Not safety squat bar, not camber squats, not front squats, not zombie squats, not box squats, whatever the hell. We're going to switch over to the barbell, get them refining that technique, refining the positions at that stage. If they have poor technique, they're not that great at squat, bench, or deadlift, you're probably already doing the competition lifts, or you should already be doing them because they need to be getting better at them. But if you're not, you would want to go ahead and switch them to that. One example might be is if somebody doesn't have great technique for bench press, but they're also very weak. Maybe they're only benching, no offense, this might offend people, but no offense, let's just say you're struggling to bench your body weight. Let's go with that one. If you're struggling to bench your body weight, then you're kind of a newbie level of strength for benching, and you may benefit from reverse band benching. Actually, you will 100% benefit from reverse band benching, so you could be doing that. You might also just be doing a lot of muscle damage to try to get stronger. So a lot of dumbbell presses, machine presses, dumbbell flies, skull crushers, cable things, like a lot of just machines, free weight movements. You might not actually be barbell benching often just because you have to create a ton of volume to get the muscle damage due to the strength level. The weaker somebody is, the more they have to do it. The more they have to train to try to create the damage that somebody stronger can create in fewer exercises and fewer sets. So if somebody's not very good at bench press, it actually isn't uncommon for them not even to be barbell benching because they're not strong enough for that to even be useful yet. If you're struggling to bench, say 115 pounds, if you divide that across all the muscles of the upper body, that really doesn't create any muscle damage. So you're getting some technique benefit, but you're wasting time in regards to physical adaptation response. You want to get muscle damage. So you might be doing reverse band benching, or you might just be doing a crap ton of bodybuilding stuff. So if that's the case, at about 12 to 16 weeks out, you do have to switch back to the barbell just to start refining the technique. So 12 weeks is when I switch to competition lifts if somebody's really good at technique. About 16 weeks or soon, or already. So they would be switched over to doing the competition lifts. Now, what does... that's basically when do we switch. So it's 12 or 16, somewhere around there, weeks, depending on technique. I have had some clients who are great in technique. We just do the last 8 weeks, sure. But that's rarely the case. Typically, I'll switch them around 12 so we can get 4 weeks to get used to it, 4 weeks to kind of peak and test and see where we're at, and then 4 weeks to recover and be ready for the meet and then crush PRs. So I like kind of I program my clients every 4 weeks. We do 4-week programs. So I'll be switching them at 12 weeks so that we can get 3 different programs in there, 3 different waves of progress. I know some programs are like 8-week programs or 12-week programs. I think those are shit. So I'm not going to do that with my clients. That's my opinion. But I just, there's no way somebody makes progressive overload in an efficient, effective manner over 12 weeks with the singular same exercises. It's a joke, in my opinion. Like I've seen a program where somebody had 12-week program. You're supposed to do flat bench for 8 to 10 reps, incline bench for 10 to 12 reps, decline bench for 6 to 8 reps, and then dips. And that was their bench day. And they're supposed to do just that. Like I think it was 3 or 4 sets per exercise. And for 12 weeks in a row, they're supposed to make some kind of progression with weight and or reps. Hell no. Ridiculous. You're going to sandbag the beginning of that program, or your technique is going to look awful by the end because you're just trying to force 5 pounds on the bar or force 1 extra rep. Those programs are trash. So I like 4-week programs, and 12 weeks gives me three rotations to where I can really get somebody peaked well. Now, what does the switch look like? Nutrition-wise, if they need to make weight, and say that, like, typically the weight classes we would aim for, we're not going to be more than about 10 to 15 pounds off. I have worked with people who've been more than that off. Absolutely. Yes. So I helped one client cut from the 190s down to 165 and got elite total, killed it, crushed it. But that's abnormal. I would not usually suggest somebody try to cut 30 pounds in like the last, couple weeks. Can it be done? Absolutely. Has it been done? Absolutely. Is it generally recommended? No. There's a lot that can go wrong with that. So typically I like people to be about 10 to 15 pounds away from the weight class. So if they compete at 148, we're going to be hovering around the high 150s, 160s. If they compete at 242, maybe we're in the 250s, low 260s. We're not going to be too far off, about 10 to 15 pounds off. And if that's the case, 12 to 16 weeks when we switch to the competition lifts, that's usually a good time to also be paying attention to nutrition. And even if somebody has a 2-hour weigh-in compared to a 24-hour weigh-in, there's still going to be some water cut component to the weight that's coming out. So you might be cutting, 4 to 8 pounds, maybe even up to 10 pounds of just water. So you don't have to diet all of that off by the competition day. You're going to do some water depletion depending on weigh-in. When that comes to be is basically we're going to treat their nutrition like the aesthetic clients. We're going to be tracking protein around 1 to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight, caloric cycling, and then progressively reduce the weekly calorie average. The risk when it comes to nutrition for strength is don't risk getting into a recovery deficit, meaning cutting your calories too early. I would not cut calories really, not below a maintenance level until after your final main lifts have done their heavy attempts. So typically, 2 to 3 weeks out from a meet, I'll have somebody do their last kind of heavy deadlift. And then 1 to 2 weeks out from the meet, their last heavy squat, last heavy bench. Then, we will cut the calories below maintenance level. But until then, I'm going to have them at maintenance calories, and that's going to clean them up. They're gonna look a little leaner, lose a little fluffy water weight. They're gonna be looking good, feeling good. But I don't get into a severe calorie reduction to where it would risk reducing their recovery ability until we get those big heavy lifts out of the way. once they do their last heavy attempt on squat and deadlift, I can cut sometimes early, on the bench, depending on the strength level. But you would want to wait till you get in their last heavy attempts on deadlift and squat, then start cutting the calories down to push for like fat loss. And then that final, like the day before weigh-in, you're basically going to do the water cut. But I wouldn't do that too early, because if you cut calories too early, you are not getting optimal recovery of the joints and the muscles. So they're going to start to lose strength. They're going to start to feel achy, some tight muscles. It negatively impacts the CNS. And that's going to make it to where they show up on the day of the meet and they're just tired, they're fatigued, and they're like, gosh, man, I was doing better in training 4 weeks ago. Or I was doing better and I hit bigger numbers 8 weeks ago. And it's because we over depleted their nutrition, if that's the case. So you want to hold off on making severe calorie cuts until you get those big heavy last attempts in, so that way you don't under recover. Training wise, main lifts are all going to be competition standards. Accessories are going to be underloaded variations, which means I'm not going to be doing like reverse band bench press where I'm actually overloading the bench press. I'm not going to do reverse band deadlift where I'm overloading the deadlift, or a trap bar deadlift where they can deadlift like 200 pounds over their actual competition deadlift. We're not doing anything that's like an overload max. We're doing underload maxes, and that's going to help make sure that we're still stimulating progress, but we're not annihilating the body. That's the idea with accessories when you're getting closer to a competition, is you want to stimulate the body to make the adaptations you want, but you're not going to just beat the crap out of the body and force and like demand the adaptation. You're going to stimulate, not force the progress. Then at about 4 to 6 weeks away from the meet, we do start to reduce volume in the accessories. You drop from maybe 3 working sets to 2 working sets, and then no working sets. You want the body feeling fresh and excited. One of the challenges I find as a trainer is my clients often go off program about 3 weeks before their meet. What happens is about 3 weeks before their meet, they're feeling great. Due to the training adaptations, we're peaking the CNS, we're starting to get them to feel good. They're feeling great, but they're nervous about what they're going to be able to do at the meet. So they go off program, hit some big PR because it feels like it gives them confidence of what they're going to be able to do. However, that jacks up the progress I'm trying to make to have their CNS peaked and their joints and muscles peaked. So it then makes it much harder for me to catch up and re-peak their body for the meet. So I really get kind of frustrated. I understand emotionally and mentally why they do it, but I get frustrated as a coach because they're making it detrimental. It's actually going to hurt their performance at the meet, which is what they really care about. So they're getting nervous, and I understand it 100%. I understand it, but you got to trust the process. So you want to be feeling good about 3 weeks before the meet. Feel as if you're like, man, maybe I should test my PR and just see where I'm at. You want to feel that way, but don't do that. Please stop doing that. But that is the feeling you want. You want to go into the meet feeling like you're freaking excited to crush this, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm chomping at the bit. I've been ready for weeks. I just want to kill this. That's the energy you want to feel, not, holy freaking crap, I'm so dead tired, I can't just wait to get this meet done with. Right? So those are the approaches that I typically use for aesthetic athletes and powerlifting, of when do we switch and then what does that switch look like. If you're interested in learning how to apply these concepts for you, you can sign up for our one-on-one coaching service, and I will take you through this process. I will do a competition with you, whether it's aesthetic or powerlifting, and I'll walk you through it, apply everything for you. You can see what it's like when all this stuff is applied well and how amazing you can feel. If you like that, we keep going with the service. Or you can take what you've learned, that system that we've applied to you and created for you, and then you can use that on your own for future competitions. But if you're interested, you can check out our services on our website, www.brittleiron.gym.com. Awesome. Hopefully this was helpful. Gave you some good information to play with and start processing and putting together a program and approach for yourself. Awesome. If you have any questions, if you need anything, reach out on the website, www.brittleiron.gym.com. On the bottom of the homepage is a contact form. You can reach me at any time. I will get back to you within 2 weeks of your email. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. The more people that know about the podcast, the more people can be benefited by the podcast. So I appreciate it if you share it, and hopefully they will as well. If you like the podcast, you can consider donating to support the podcast, which you can do on our website. And if you like the information that we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us. Please follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name Brittle Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.